"Dad, please don't speak at my wedding. It'll just make things awkward." That's what she said. Not in private, not in a whisper, but in front of her fiancé, his family, and half the wedding party. She said it like she was asking someone to switch seats on a plane. Casual, efficient, final. And then she raised her glass and smiled. The others chuckled, unsure if it was a joke. But I knew better. It wasn't. It was a line in the sand, drawn in crystal and white linen. And for the first time in my life, my daughter, my only child, chose to erase part of her past right in front of me. She didn't yell. She didn't accuse. That would have been easier. At least then I could have fought back. But this? This was something colder. A quiet rewrite of the story we once shared. So I did what I've done too many times since her mother passed. I swallowed my pride and said nothing. I sat there at the edge of the long rehearsal dinner table. Not at the head, not beside her. Near the back. Between two people who didn't know my name and didn't care to learn. The wine was expensive, the food beautiful, and I couldn't taste any of it, because all I could think about was the toast I had written. It wasn't long, just a few words. A memory of her as a child running barefoot through the sprinklers, of her mother laughing on the porch, of a family that once was whole. But apparently those memories weren't invited either. They had no place in the new life she was building. A life where grief was inconvenient, where her mother's name wasn't spoken, where I was tolerated but muted. And the worst part? No one else found it strange. To them I was just an older man, a guest with a gray suit and a thinning voice, someone who was probably lucky to even be there. They didn't know the nights I sat up with her when she had fevers so high I thought I'd lose her. They didn't know how I learned to braid her hair after her mother died, just so she wouldn't feel different from the other girls at school. They didn't know that I had sold my wife's car to pay for the down payment on this wedding venue. But that's the thing about quiet fathers. People forget the hands that built the foundation when they only look at the lights on the ceiling. So I smiled back, nodded, said, "Of course," and the room moved on without me. But what they didn't know, what even my daughter had forgotten, was that I wasn't the only one who had something to say. In my coat pocket, there was a flash drive. On it, my wife's last message. A video she recorded just before the chemo finally silenced her voice. A message she made for her daughter's wedding day. She made me promise. "Play this," she said, "even if they forget me, even if they try to erase the pieces of us that made her." And I never broke a promise to my wife. So no, I wouldn't be giving a toast tomorrow, but my wife would. And when her voice echoed through that hall, they would all remember who built this family, and who was never supposed to be erased. Friends, let me pause for a moment. Please take a second to tell us in the comments, where are you listening from? Has anything like this ever happened in your life? Have you ever felt quietly pushed aside by the very people you raised? If this story touches you, consider subscribing and sharing this video. It truly helps us grow and keep telling real, emotional stories like this one. Now, let's continue. The reception hall was dressed in gold and ivory. Every table glowed with soft candles, glittering name cards, and freshly polished silverware. A string quartet played something delicate in the corner while waiters floated by with champagne flutes. Laughter hummed through the air, that curated kind of joy that comes with expensive weddings and perfect weather. I walked in quietly, as I always do. No grand entrance, no one noticed, and I didn't expect them to. I was used to that now. The silence around me, the stillness when others moved. But when I reached the table where I had been told to sit, there was no card. Every seat had a name, except one. I stood there for a moment, unsure whether to wait or to sit anyway. A distant cousin smiled at me, half-hearted and distracted, then looked away before I could speak. A younger man nearby, someone from the groom's side, I think, saw my confusion and offered a light, meaningless shrug. "It's probably just an oversight," he said. An oversight. That word sat heavy in my chest. But I knew it wasn't. Because in a room where every detail had been obsessively planned, from the ribbon on the napkins to the personalized favors at each chair, there were no oversights. There were only decisions, choices, and someone had chosen not to give me a place. I don't mean just a seat, I mean a place, a belonging, a presence that mattered. I walked slowly to an empty spot at the far end of the room, a chair with no card, no favor, no name. I sat down and folded my hands. The music played on, plates clinked, Voices rose. But around me, a strange hush, like I'd entered someone else's celebration, like I wasn't family, but a figure from the past no one wanted to explain. I watched her, my daughter, across the room. She looked radiant, glowing with that kind of joy that makes people forget anything that came before it. She threw her head back in laughter as her new in-laws surrounded her. Her eyes never once searched for mine, not even a glance. And yet there she stood, in a dress her mother helped sketch years ago, in a hall I had helped pay for, with music her mother loved, playing songs from the kitchen radio we used to dance to on Sunday mornings. But none of that lived here anymore. This wasn't a place for memory. This was a place for reinvention. And I wasn't part of the new draft. I looked down at my hands, rough from years of labor. The hands that held her when she took her first steps. The hands that signed the school forms, fixed her car, paid the bills, held her mother's when the pain got too strong. And now those hands had no place at her table. I should have been angry. I should have left. But all I felt was hollow, not hurt, not bitter. Just absent. Like I had already died in her mind, and this was some polite ghost she allowed to sit nearby so she could claim she'd invited her father. But this wasn't an invitation, it was an obligation, and barely that. The flash drive in my coat pocket felt heavier than before, a quiet weight against my chest. I reached for it, pressed my hand against it through the fabric, like checking a heartbeat that was no longer mine. Her mother still had a voice, and soon that voice would fill this room, not to hurt, not to shame, but to remind you, because even if I no longer had a seat at the table, she had something to say, and she would not be forgotten. The room grew louder as the wine flowed freely. Glasses clinked in rehearsed celebration, and laughter bounced from marble walls that had never heard our family's quiet kind of love. The slow dinners, the soft lullabies, the prayers whispered during long nights in hospital corridors. That kind of love doesn't echo well in rooms built for performance. I stayed seated in my unnamed chair, half listening, half forgetting why I was even there. Maybe out of loyalty, maybe out of guilt, or maybe because walking out would have felt too much like giving up. And I'd done enough of that when I couldn't save her. That's when I heard it, 2 tables behind me, not loud, but not hidden either. A voice dripping with casual elegance and polished detachment. It belonged to her future mother-in-law, the kind of woman who wore pearls like armor and spoke grief like it was a phase. She leaned in close to another guest, swirling her wine like it held answers to better stories. "I'm just so proud of her," she said, voice soft but sharp. "It's refreshing to see a young woman let go of that old-fashioned grief. She deserves to move on, don't you think?" The words cut deeper than any scream could have. There was no malice in her tone. And somehow, that made it worse. It wasn't personal. It was dismissive. Clinical. That old-fashioned grief she referred to? That was my wife. The woman who carried our daughter for 9 months, while battling morning sickness and part-time work. The woman who stayed up for nights feeding, calming, healing. The woman who braided our daughter's hair every morning, even while her own fell out in clumps from the chemo. The grief they spoke of so lightly wasn't a decoration from the past. It was the thread that had held our family together. It was the ache that still echoed in our home. And now it was being treated like a fashion trend that had, thankfully, passed. I clenched my hands under the table until my knuckles burned white. Not out of rage, but because there was nowhere to put that pain. No space in this room for truth, only curated perfection and the kind of forgetting that feels polite. And then came the worst part. My daughter laughed, a soft, familiar laugh. The one that used to come from our kitchen when she'd play with her mom's apron strings. The one I hadn't heard in years, not since the funeral. She laughed and said nothing. No correction, no memory, no defense. She allowed the version of the story where her mother was a footnote, a shadow, a thing to move on from. That moment, quiet and passing, said everything I needed to know. She hadn't just rewritten the story of her life. She had edited the author out entirely. And me? I was somewhere between the appendix and the acknowledgments, barely included, quietly tolerated, completely unnecessary. The violinist played a waltz. Couples stood to dance. She took her fiancé's hand and smiled at him the way her mother used to smile at me. a soft kind of trust, the kind of look that was built over time and pain and surviving things together. I wondered if she knew what it cost to love like that, to lose like that. I wondered if she remembered who showed her, or if she thought that kind of grief really was old-fashioned. The flash drive in my pocket felt like a living thing now, as if her voice, my wife's voice, knew she was being erased, as if it were pressing itself against me, begging for air, not to interrupt the night, not to punish, but to remind. Because when history is buried too deep beneath flowers and toasts, truth starts to suffocate. And her voice? Her voice had waited long enough. I had written the toast weeks in advance. Not because I was eager to speak, God knows I never liked being the center of attention, but because it mattered. Because words carry weight when they're built from memory. Every line was carved carefully, not for applause, but for truth. Truth that deserved to live in the light, even just for one evening. I wrote it by hand, not typed, not drafted by some wedding planner, just me, a pen, and the ache of missing her. I rewrote it 7 times, burned through entire nights trying to get the tone right. Not too heavy, not too sad, but honest. A reflection of love that spanned decades, sickness, sacrifice, and silence. The opening spoke of a little girl who used to twirl in her mother's oversized sweaters, laughing like the world would never hurt her. Of a woman who sang lullabies even when her lungs ached. Of a marriage that held strong not because it was perfect, but because it chose to keep standing. Even when the storms didn't pass, I never intended for it to be about me. It wasn't my story, not really. It was hers, her mother's. A woman who, even when cancer had stolen her strength, still whispered, "Make sure she feels loved at her wedding, even if I can't be there." I kept that line in the toast. And now? It stayed folded in the inside pocket of my suit. Not a speech. Not anymore. Now it was a relic. A letter written to a memory no one wanted read aloud. The pain of it wasn't just being denied the moment. It was watching the moment itself be rewritten. To see the woman who once shaped every corner of that child's world, reduced to nothing. There were no photos of her mother on the welcome table. No mention in the printed programs. Not even a reserved chair with a rose, like some families do for loved ones lost. It was as if her presence, her existence, had become inconvenient. Too tender, too outdated, too fragile for this glossy new version of a life. And still I had the words ready, in case. Just in case someone remembered, someone asked. But they didn't. I watched as toasts were made, full of light jokes and charming stories. The best man talked about college pranks. The maid of honor cried about late-night phone calls and dress shopping. And then they all raised their glasses. Glasses that had never once poured out a drop for the woman who made this wedding possible with her fight. With her prayers. With her absence. I didn't raise mine, not because I was angry, but because I was mourning something deeper than death. I was mourning erasure. Of history. Of love. Of a woman who mattered. And yet I said nothing. Again. Because fathers like me aren't built to make scenes. We're built to endure them. Quietly. But in my pocket, her words remained. And if I couldn't give my toast, then maybe hers would take its place. Not to shame, but to remind, because someone needed to say her name. Someone needed to speak the love that raised this bride, even if the bride had forgotten, even if the world had moved on. The paper crinkled softly every time I shifted, like a heartbeat that refused to fade. It was a gray morning when she asked me to film it, 3 months before the end. 3 months before, the house stopped smelling like lavender and soup and began to smell like sterile gauze and fading breath. The light through the bedroom window was soft that day, the kind of light that makes you believe, for just a moment, that maybe things aren't getting worse. She was sitting propped up on pillows, hair thin, hands colder than they should have been in late spring. But her eyes were still alive, still filled with that quiet fire she always carried, the same fire she passed on to our daughter. "I want to record something," she whispered, her voice a rasp wrapped in dignity. For her wedding day, I didn't answer at first, because answering made it real, made it final. Like I was accepting that she'd never see our daughter walk down the aisle, never see the dress, never cry in the front row, never get that one last dance. But she waited, calm, because she knew me better than anyone ever would. So I nodded. She asked me to open the curtains. She wanted natural light. She always said it made her look more like herself. And then she asked me to hold the camera, not set it on a tripod, not call someone else, me, because this wasn't for strangers. This was for family, for legacy. She took a moment to fix her scarf, straighten her blouse, even put on a little lipstick. The soft rose one I used to tell her made her look like spring. Then she folded her hands in her lap and looked into the camera. Not like someone saying goodbye, but like a mother saying, "Remember me." She spoke of childhood, of bedtime stories and scraped knees, of music in the kitchen and pancakes on Sundays. She spoke of pride in the young woman our daughter had become, and then her voice caught just once. "If you're seeing this," she said, "it means I couldn't be there, but I am. I am in every lesson I whispered to you when you couldn't sleep. I'm in the way you love fiercely even when it hurts. I'm in your walk, your laughter, your stubbornness, and I'm in the man sitting quietly in the crowd, the one who gave up more than you'll ever know just to keep you standing." Her hand trembled, and I reached for it, off camera, but she didn't stop. "I know this day is full of beauty. I hope it is. But don't let them erase what built you. Don't let the world convince you that grief is outdated. It's not, it's holy, and it means you loved someone worth missing." She closed with a small smile. "And one last thing. If your father plays this, it means he kept his promise. He always did. He's the reason you still stand tall. So honor him too. Not with applause, but with space. Give him space to be heard. Because he stayed, even after I was gone." When it ended, she leaned her head against my shoulder and exhaled slowly. "That's it," she whispered. I didn't say a word. I couldn't. I held her until she fell asleep. And when I left the room, I carried that video like sacred fire, copied it to a flash drive, labeled it with her handwriting for her wedding day, and tucked it away in the top drawer, waiting, hoping maybe I'd never have to use it, because maybe, just maybe, our daughter would find a way to carry her mother with her without being reminded. But I promised, and I never broke a promise to her. So when they denied me a toast, when they pretended her mother was just a name in the past, when they served wine and played music and toasted a future built on curated forgetting, I reached into my coat pocket and felt the soft edge of that flash drive, not just plastic and memory, but the last request of a woman who never asked for much, except this: don't let them forget me. Don't let them forget us. Say the words they're too afraid to hear, and I would, no matter the cost, because love doesn't end when someone stops showing up. Sometimes that's exactly when it begins. The doors swung open, and a hush fell over the chapel. Sunlight poured through the stained glass, splashing jewel tones across polished wood pews. Guests rose in unison, eyes bright with expectation. My heart tightened, a familiar ache that hadn't left since the day I first held her tiny hand in mine. I stayed seated, at the very back, where shadows and silence cocooned me. My suit felt too large, the dark fabric swallowing me whole. I watched as the flower petals drifted down the aisle, each one a quiet apology for the world I'd lost. The quartet's strings trembled and my chest trembled in response, memories stirring like restless ghosts. And then I saw her. She stood at the entrance, glowing in ivory lace. Her veil caught the light, haloing her face. She looked every bit the bride her mother had envisioned, every bit the woman I'd watched grow, first in my arms, then under her mother's patient care, then on her own. But the sight brought no warmth. Instead, it sharpened the void where hope and belonging once lived. She didn't look at me. Her gaze lifted upward, then to the man beside her, her new father figure, the one she trusted to give her away. He offered an arm. She slipped hers around it. A quiet ritual, rehearsed and perfect, but one that cut me deeper than any words ever could. I had waited for that moment, her tiny hand in mine, a proud father's stride down the aisle, yet here I sat, replaced. The hush lingered as they moved forward, each step measured, echoing hollow in the hushed grandeur of the chapel. I counted them, 1, 2, 3. Each footfall a reminder that I no longer belonged in the chapters of her life she was writing now. I thought of the nights I stayed awake, teaching her to dance in the kitchen, guiding her through her mother's floral journal, quietly wiping tears when she scraped her knee. I remembered the day she wore her mother's wedding veil for dress-up, twirling until she collapsed in giggles. I remembered the promise I made to her mother, to always be there. And here I was, invisible. The bridesmaids paused at the altar. The officiant cleared his throat. My throat closed. I felt the weight of every unsaid word, every memory unacknowledged pressing me into the pew. An auditorium of onlookers who saw a man in a suit, not a father's love branded in calluses and midnight prayers. I closed my eyes, inhaling church perfume and lilies. Grief washed through me, sharp, cold, relentless. Not for the death I had endured, but for the erasure, for the life I once knew that was slipping through spaces someone else now claimed. Slowly the ceremony began. Vows were spoken, rings exchanged. I heard her voice, soft and steady, promising forever. I held the flash drive in my hand, feeling its smooth edge like a lifeline. My wife's last words waited in its tiny chip, an echo of truth that would not be silenced. Outside, the chapel doors stood wide, the world awaiting their exit. But I remained, a silent sentinel for history's keeper, for the woman who'd built us with love, for the daughter who deserved to remember. When the final "I do" settled into the rafters, a gasp rippled through the congregation. Someone had pressed play. The quartet faltered. All eyes turned backward, toward the back row, toward me, and toward the unseen speaker rising in that hushed glow of stained glass. And in that moment, the wedding truly began. Not with a father giving his daughter away, but with a mother's voice reclaiming her place. Not with hands exchanging rings, but with truth breaking the silence. The wedding began in the space between erasure and remembrance, where love refuses to stay hidden and where promises once made find their voice. A slender hand pressed a small velvet box into mine just before the ceremony began, a gesture so polished it felt rehearsed. I opened it to find a pair of cufflinks gleaming like frozen tears, silver, engraved with her new monogram, impossibly expensive and achingly impersonal. In that moment, the metal weight in my palm measured every unspoken apology the room owed me, every moment of absence they deemed acceptable in exchange for this token. I remembered the nights I sat at her bedside, tending to fevers, reading stories until her eyelids fluttered closed. The sweat of my brow had paid for her medicine. My sleepless hours had sewn the blankets that warmed her. And yet, here I was, being handed cufflinks instead of a seat at the head table, cufflinks instead of a word of thanks, cufflinks instead of the embrace that once said, "I love you." The gift felt like a benediction of guilt, a confession embroidered in silver. Still, I placed them inside my jacket pocket, because beneath every strained courtesy lies a deeper truth. I am her father. No ceremony, no slight, no finely wrapped apology could erase the years I carried her through scraped knees and broken hearts. I straightened my cuff, the metal cold against my skin, and felt its weight anchor me in a world that tried to drift away from what built it. I wore them not for vanity, but to remind myself that blood is thicker than ceremony. As the guests gathered around the altar, swirling in celebration, I clasped my hands and closed my eyes. The cufflinks pressed against my chest with each heartbeat, a silent promise that I would hold my ground. I would let them serve their toasts and weave their new beginnings. But I would not forget the foundation laid in heartbreak and healing. The humility of that gift became my armor, a stark reminder that forgiveness can look like acceptance, and that love sometimes endures best when carried quietly, like a pair of cufflinks hidden in a father's coat, glinting with unspoken devotion. She stood at the altar like a vision, radiant, poised, every line of her silhouette sculpted by hope and celebration. The sunlight danced through the stained glass, illuminating her veil in hues of rose and gold, making her look like something born of light rather than flesh and bone. That smile, so familiar, so perfect, should have been a balm. It should have comforted me, reminded me of the little girl who once chased fireflies in the backyard, the teenager who laughed until her sides ached at inside jokes we shared. But instead, it became the sharpest blade. Our eyes met just for a fraction of a heartbeat, a breath suspended between past and present. I dared to hope she recognized me, that behind the gloss of wedding day splendor, she would see the father who held her trembling hand after nightmares, who stood beneath her mother's hospital window in the dead of night. But her gaze skated past me, cool and practiced, as if I were nothing more than a decorative pillar in some elaborate stage design. Even strangers found warmth in her eyes, the bridesmaid whose cheeks glowed with tears of joy, the the distant cousin who reached out instinctively to steady her. All of them knew how to share this moment. Everyone except the one who built it. A quiet ache spread through me, heavier than any grief I had carried before. It wasn't anger I felt, but something more searing, the sting of invisibility, the yearning to matter in a life that had moved on without me. I sat rigid in my chair, feeling the weight of every erased memory press against my ribs. Each breath tasted of regret and unspoken goodbyes. I wondered if she ever felt a flicker of regret, if at any point she remembered the arms that taught her to walk, the voice that coaxed her through childhood storms, the man who sold everything he had to give her this day. Yet in that hollow space, where my presence had been denied, I felt something else awaken, determination, because even a smile crafted for the world couldn't erase the threads that bound us. And though her eyes might have been dismissive, my heart refused to let go. I would find my way back into her story, one way or another, even if it meant speaking for two voices when the time came. Until then, I remained seated, chin lifted, faith unwavering, waiting for the moment when truth would crack the perfect veneer and she would truly see me again. The music swelled in the grand hall, a tender waltz that once echoed through our living room when her mother coaxed me onto the dance floor with a mischievous smile. Tonight, it belonged to them, her new family, who gathered in a circle of approval, their faces alight with pride as they guided her across the polished floor. I watched from the edge, feeling the pulse of the melody like a distant heartbeat I could no longer reach. Speeches floated around me, stories of college adventures, jokes about his quirky habits, memories of summer spent on faraway beaches where my presence was never noted. There was laughter, there were tears, and there were toasts raised to a bright future. But never once did the photograph of a young bride in yellow daisies appear on the table, nor did a single mention stir the air with the name of the woman who gave this daughter life. It was as if her mother had never existed, as if the grief and love that shaped every fiber of my daughter's being were inconvenient footnotes, carefully left out of the program. The dance went on, her body curving in gentle confidence, and I felt each revolution carve a deeper hollow within me. Yet with every turn, I clung to one truth. No waltz, no speech, no curated gallery of memories could diminish the bond forged in hospitals and sunlit kitchens. History might be rewritten tonight, erased in crystal glasses and polished banter, but the real story lived in the silent spaces between steps, in the echo of a mother's lullaby, in the memory of hands that held a trembling 4-year-old as she learned to walk. And though the world outside this circle celebrated a new beginning, I carried the unspoken legacy of love that time could not erase, waiting for the moment when my wife's voice would break through the orchestration of forgetting and remind us all of who we once were and who we would always be. The master of ceremonies raised his microphone, his voice polished and warm, inviting the crowd to join in a final toast. Around me, glasses lifted like shimmering moons, catching the light and the laughter of those who believed every word they were about to say. I felt the swell of approval, the collective breath of celebration, and then I stood. Not because I wanted to be part of their applause, but because I needed to break away. Each step toward the exit felt like breaking a chain, the soft shuffle of my shoes on the carpet louder than any cheer. Eyes followed me momentarily, curious at my sudden departure, but soon returned to the spectacle at the front. I moved through the guests as if I were drifting, present yet invisible, until I slipped through a side door into the quieter corridors of the venue. That's when I saw it. The video booth. A small alcove with a mounted camera, its red light dark, its screen blank and expectant. It stood like an altar awaiting sacrifice, untouched amid the glamour. My breath caught. My fingers brushed the flash drive in my pocket, its surface smooth against my palm, humming with promise. In that stillness, the celebration on the other side of the door became a distant echo. The spilled champagne, the glittering gowns, the swaying dancers, all of it blurred into insignificance. Here, in the hushed glow of the booth's LED light, the weight of memory pressed in, demanding release. I slipped inside, closed the curtain behind me, and felt the world fall away. My heart pounded as I connected the drive to the port beneath the camera. A single click resonated like a verdict. The screen flickered, then warmed with her face, her gentle smile framed by that soft spring light she always loved. I straightened, folding my hands as I had for every moment that truly mattered, and let her speak for us both. No one clapped, no one watched, but the silence in that booth roared louder than any applause could. It carried the laughter we forgot, the tears we held back, the promises we nearly broke, and as her voice filled that small space, every longing, every loss, every unspoken truth unfurled like a banner against the curated joy outside. In that moment, I stood, not as a ghost of the past, but as a guardian of what must never be erased. And though the hall beyond carried on without me, here in this quiet flicker of light and memory, we began to reclaim our story. My fingers trembled as I slid the flash drive into the booth's port, half afraid the connection would fail, that her words, painstakingly recorded in her waning strength, would dissolve like ghosts in the light. But the screen blinked to life, illuminating the small space with a soft glow. There was no introduction, no pomp, nothing more than her face, calm, determined, framed by the wisps of hair she refused to lose in those last days. And then her voice, warm and familiar, rose like a benediction. "My sweet girl, if you're seeing this, it means I couldn't be there. But I am." Her image flickered as if waking from a dream. She leaned forward, eyes bright despite the pale shadows under them. That single sentence carved through the booth's hush, knocking down invisible walls of pretense and polite silence. Tears welled in my own eyes, and I realized I was speaking aloud in the darkness. She is. She spoke of childhood mornings, the way sunlight danced on her hair as she crawled into bed, begging for just one more story. She spoke of teenage heartbreaks, first crushes, awkward dances, and how she followed my advice, even when it hurt. She confessed to every scraped knee I'd tended, every broken promise I'd kept, and every prayer we had whispered together in the dark. Each word was a testament to love that death could not still. Each pause, when she fought for breath, echoed with the cost of that love. She laughed softly as she reminded our daughter of the time she painted the kitchen walls in crayon, framing the chaos as art. Then her expression softened and her voice cracked. "Remember your father. Remember that he stayed. He stayed when I had nothing left. He will stay for you, always. Honor him as you honor me." I pressed my hand to the glass of the booth, feeling the warmth of her presence through the cool barrier. My daughter's wedding played on outside, the music, the laughter, the toasts. But here there was only this, her mother's voice reclaiming the silence that had tried to swallow us. When the video ended, the screen went dark, and the booth's quiet felt both sacred and empty. I held my breath, waiting for something, any sign that I was no longer invisible. For applause, for shouting, for footsteps rushing to intervene. Instead, I heard only my own ragged breathing, but I no longer felt alone, because her voice had returned, and in that simple act, no fanfare, no permission, she had rewritten the story for us. Not with grand gestures, but with truth. And in truth, we were found again. The moment her voice spoke, the world outside the booth seemed to tilt. Glasses clinked half-heartedly in the main hall, but here the air turned still, as if time itself pressed mute. I pressed my palm against the cool metal frame, feeling the tremor in my own hand echo through the silence. The guests beyond might have been dancing, laughing, celebrating a new beginning, but in this small booth, every heartbeat of memory reverberated like a drumbeat in an empty cathedral. Her words drifted into the quiet, stories of midnight lullabies sung through tears, of scraped knees kissed and bandaged by gentle hands, of whispered prayers said two at a time, mother and father together against the darkness. She spoke of the first day of school, the awkward teenage years, the moment she held our daughter in her arms for the first time, how I watched her face soften into a mother's love that I knew only secondhand. Each recollection built a bridge between past and present, made of moments that no celebration could ever replicate. And then her voice cracked, a fragile tremor that split the hush open like glass. "And don't forget your father. He's been both parents. He never gave up." I felt the words like a bolt of lightning striking deep inside me. In that suspended breath, I imagined the hundreds of nights I rocked her to sleep when fever and fear overtook her small frame. I saw the early mornings I rose before dawn to fix breakfast, to make sure she never felt alone when the world seemed too big. I remembered how I carried her through hospital corridors, whispered, "I'm here," until her sobs quieted. That single line, spoken with the weight of a lifetime, returned every drop of love I had poured into her, love everyone else had tried to smooth over with polite forgetfulness. Outside, I could almost sense the faintest ripple. A fork held midair, a conversation halted in mid-sentence, a head turning in curious confusion. The booth's curtain flickered, as if caught in a sudden breeze, and I pressed closer to the screen, wanting to catch every nuance. Her eyes searched mine through the digital glow, and for the first time that evening I felt seen. In that frozen moment, the party stopped mattering. The gowns, the flowers, the orchestrated joy, they all fell away until there was only truth. A father's sacrifice laid bare by a mother who, and this was her final gift, refused to let love be silenced by good intentions or social grace. When the last echo of her voice faded, the hush lingered, thicker than any applause could have been. My chest tightened with the weight of it, sorrow for what had been denied, relief that at least her words had found their way, and hope that now her daughter could never unsee the man who refused to give up. And as I stepped out of the booth back into the glow of the reception hall, I carried her voice with me, an unbreakable promise that the next chapter would be written differently. No more erasures, no more silences, only truth finally spoken aloud. The reception hall fell into a stunned hush, as though the air itself were holding its breath. Faces glistened with tears, friends, distant relatives, even those who earlier had offered polite smiles now stood motionless, silent witnesses to a revelation that refused to be contained. Some dabbed at their eyes with napkins, others stared at the screen where her mother's face had vanished, as if hoping for one more word to appear. The coldest among them, her new in-laws, whose smiles had once held just enough warmth to mask their judgment, looked away, their gaze sliding to the floor rather than meet the truth they had helped bury. A mother-in-law who had toasted progress now felt the weight of history press against her throat, and a father-in-law, stiff in his tailored suit, finally understood that no gift of cufflinks could atone for the absence of a voice that mothered them all. And my daughter, my beautiful, radiant girl, stood frozen. Her hands trembled at her sides, the delicate lace of her gown barely containing the quiver of her shape. Her eyes, those bright windows I once knew so well, filled with tears that glinted in the chandelier light. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again, overcome by a torrent of emotion she couldn't yet name. No one had silenced this message. No one could. Because love, real love, doesn't need permission to speak. It breaks through walls of decorum, it shatters ceremonies built on curated forgetting, and it demands reckoning. It is an unruly force that surges beyond the bounds of polite conversation, beyond the confines of place cards and empty gestures. It is the echo of lullabies and hospital whispers, the legacy of midnight prayers, the tender strength of a mother's final words. As the last chord of the recording faded, a single voice broke the silence. It was her, softer than a sigh, but steadier than any speech I had ever dared deliver. "Dad," she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of all she had felt and all she had lost. "I'm so sorry." She took a step toward me, her gown whispering across the polished floor. Every eye followed her, and in that moment the world shifted. The curated narrative unraveled, replaced by something far more beautiful, an unvarnished reunion of two hearts that need no permission to remember. I rose and held out my hand, not to chastise or reproach, but to forgive and to love. She slipped into my arms, and the hall exhaled in relief, a collective release of breath that carried away pretense and remorse. Outside the glow of the chandeliers, the night pressed in, but inside, beneath the soft glow of newfound truth, a father and daughter stood together, unafraid of love's unruly power. For it had spoken, it had been heard, and nothing could ever make it silent again. The lights had dimmed to a soft amber glow, the last of the guests drifting away like autumn leaves on a gentle wind. The polished floors, once alive with laughter and dancing, now whispered only memory. Chairs lay scattered, half pushed from tables, and the scent of wilted petals mingled with the faint sweetness of spilled champagne. In that quiet aftermath, grief and relief and love all hung in the air, heavy as incense. She didn't burst through the doors, eyes blazing with regret. She didn't collapse in tears before the empty ballroom. There were no proclamations of sorrow, no dramatic confession beneath the chandeliers. Instead, she moved through the hushed rows, her gown whispering secrets to the floor, until she found me sitting alone on the edge of the stage. The glow of the exit signs painted her in contrasting light and shadow, a bride caught between two worlds. She paused a few feet away, catching my gaze for a heartbeat, a flicker of something profound and tender. Then she sat down silently beside me, close enough that our shoulders touched. The distance between us felt both vast and vanishing. We sat without speaking, listening to the echo of our footsteps outside as the staff gathered linens and folded tablecloths, restoring order to the space that order had shattered. I felt the warmth of her hand brush mine. The gesture was small, but it carried the weight of her unspoken journey. She took my hand in both of hers, her grip trembling with the magnitude of what was left unsaid. I turned my palm upward, offering her the refuge of my silence, the place where forgiveness lives when words fall short. She lowered her head, and in the soft curve of her shoulders, I sensed the years of divided loyalty she carried. She whispered, "I was wrong," her voice a fragile thread weaving between us. No trembling sobs, no harsh admission, just a confession held in the quiet curve of a single sentence. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Instead, I held her hand tighter, feeling the pulse of her regret and relief against my skin. I felt my own heart swell and break and heal in that simplicity. In the hush of the emptied hall, a father and daughter rediscovered each other, not through speeches or grand apologies, but through the profound eloquence of shared silence and touch. Time stretched and folded, measured not by ticking clocks, but by the steady rhythm of our joined hands. The world outside could wait. In that moment, nothing mattered but the unspoken forgiveness passing between us. The chandeliers above faded into darkness. The last staff member flicked off the final light, and the vast room breathed around us, cradling our reconciliation. When we finally rose, the emptiness no longer felt cold. It felt sacred, a testament to the love that endures beyond forgetting, beyond hurt, beyond every misstep. We walked out together side by side, the quiet power of an apology given and accepted, guiding each step into the night. Years have passed, but when the calendar flips to her wedding anniversary, our home fills with the soft hum of that familiar recording. She presses play, not out of obligation or empty ritual, but because her mother's voice still carries the power to heal and anchor a family adrift. The screen flickers to life in our living room, her face bathed in the same gentle light she chose that day, and the hush that falls over us is as sacred now as it was in that hidden booth. Our granddaughter sits beside her mother, wide-eyed, learning a heritage stitched from love and survival. She listens to every word, the mother's laughter echoing through memory, the gentle chiding for scraped knees, the fierce embrace of a life that refused to yield. Then comes the hallmark line. "And don't forget your father. He stayed when I couldn't." And in their shared gaze I see wonder, gratitude, a recognition that some promises outlive the ones who made them. I stand apart, content to be the quiet witness this time. I never gave the toast I wrote so long ago. Its paper creases remain folded in my drawer like a secret talisman, because the real speech wasn't mine to deliver but hers, a voice that transcended absence, that broke through curated silences, that reclaimed the story of a family nearly undone by forgetting. When the last echo fades, my daughter reaches for my hand. No words are needed. Her eyes carry the weight of every lost moment found again. In that gentle squeeze, I hear the applause I longed for, the affirmation that love endures beyond ceremonies and toasts. And as the video ends, we smile, knowing that this is the toast that matters most, a promise kept, a mother's legacy carried forward, and a father's steadfast heart finally honored in the echo of her voice.